We, the people, chose to do these things together because we know this country cannot accomplish great things if we pursue nothing greater than our own individual ambition. Unfortunately, you've grown up hearing voices that incessantly warn of government as nothing more than some separate, sinister entity that's at the root of all our problems. Some of these same voices also do their best to gum up the works. They'll warn that tyranny is always lurking just around the corner. You should reject these voices, because what they suggest is that our brave and creative and unique experiment in self-rule is somehow just a sham with which we can't be trusted. We have never been a people who place all of our faith in government to solve our problems. We shouldn't want to. But we don't think the government is the source of all our problems.
I was not directly involved in those conversations, no.
But that's my best memory.
At that time?
It's very vague.
Sir, can I get...
No, you can't get back to me. I want to know. He just whispered something in your ear. What did he say?
I couldn't hear, so...
I will not answer any questions or testify today. I decline to answer that question for the reasons I've already given. I will not answer any questions or testify about the subject matter of this committee's meeting.
Mr. Cummings just said we should run this like a courtroom, and I agree with him. She just testified. She just waived her Fifth Amendment right to privilege. You don't get to tell your side of the story and then not be subjected to cross-examination. That's not the way it works. She waived her right to Fifth Amendment privilege by issuing an opening statement. She ought to stand here and answer our questions.
Given their power to destroy businesses and audit individuals, do you think it would be useful for the IRS to require all of its employees to take a class studying the Constitution and Bill of Rights in order to make positively sure that they understand the concept of government restraint created at our founding?
I think it's very important that IRS personnel be well trained.
Did you study the Constitution? You're a lawyer, are you not? Or an attorney?
I went to law school.
You went to law school. Did you study the Constitution?
I believe I took constitutional law, but I'm not prepared to take an exam at this time.
Trust has not been eroded or undermined, that it's been destroyed. That trust is gone. My constituents, the people I represent, believe the federal government is out to get them.
This is just so frustrating to me. You know, the whole question here is, we've heard this from time to time, just about accountability. And in all the scandals, we hear the same thing from time after time by the government officials that are involved. Benghazi, IRS, AP reporters, Fast and Furious. Time after time, we're hearing people, wasn't my job, I don't know, it was the other office, I was recused. I didn't find out about it until you found out about it. Where does the accountability begin? People's lives are on the line in these things overseas. People's constitutional rights are at stake here.
This is the Gun Owners News Hour, with the latest news about threats to your liberty and your right to keep and bear arms. Our host is Larry Pratt, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. Our guests include elected and other public officials, journalists, citizen activists, and others who are fighting for the Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment. The Gun Owners News Hour covers a broad range of constitutional issues, particularly the debate over private ownership of firearms. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control, it's about control.
Today, a very interesting guest, someone that used to live in Indiana when I was there, so that was a while ago, has now written a novel about a Marxist president of the United States who's a one-man wrecking ball of the country and the Constitution. Hard to separate sometimes whether life imitates art or the other way around. John Price, author of The Warning, and that's what the novel is intended to be, folks. We are extremely close to being at a point of no return, and if the Congress doesn't resolve to control this guy, cut off his money, and in effect neuter his ability to do what he's been doing, the country's cooked. And that's the warning that old smiley-faced John Price brings to the readers. In fact, John, you've kind of acted on your own less than rosy assessment of the future, that the time can come, according to your warning, time may well be at hand, when it's time to get out of Dodge and find a somewhat more hospitable environment for an American, freedom-loving American to live in.
That's true, Larry. And by the way, thank you for having me on your program.
My pleasure.
A number of Americans that we have met over the last couple of years have decided that the best place to be when America is no longer America is outside of America. And so we're in Central America. There are a large number of Americans who have moved there. And it's really an interesting environment to be able to look at what happens back here from a distance.
And you can say back here because you are visiting at the moment, but do not have any plans to set down roots again north of our southern border.
No. We've actually obtained residence in the country where we're living. It's a very simple process. You turn in your birth certificate and your marriage certificate and a police background check and a few dollars, and eventually you get residency.
Yeah, my wife's home country has a similar policy. You have enough money in the bank, and like you say, with the background check, they're pretty happy to have somebody that's bringing some money in their jeans. It's good for the economy, and they got that part figured out real well. I'm going to be back and talk some more with John Price about his book, The Warning.
Now, more news about the threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. This is the Gun Owners News Hour. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Today I'm talking with John Price. His novel, it's not really that fictitious, I'm sorry to say, but his novel is The Warning. And if you would like to get a hold of it, you can go to endofamericabook.com on the web and get your own copy. It's a rather thought-provoking little treatise, and it clearly, John, you and I were talking before the show, that you had to write this puppy really fast to keep ahead of breaking events.
Well, that's the funny part, Larry. I was writing, sitting looking out over the Gulf, and I just finished a chapter, and I turned on Fox News, and the event that I was imagining in my mind had just happened. So I thought, well, obviously I can't use that. So keeping up with unfolding events was the most difficult.
And it's not that I hear you claiming to have a gift of prophecy, although you might, but actually, if one of us were to drop a dime onto the desk, we know what the dime is going to do. It's going to go down and hit the desk. Right. There are just certain laws of human action that make it rather easy to say, well, if we do this, this, and this, then this is almost certain to happen. And like you just said, you were putting together if A, then B, then C, and then wham, D's right in your face.
Which I guess is something that shouldn't surprise us too much in a way, because when you say to a country, in 5 days, I'm going to fundamentally transform the nation, and then you follow through with that promise, that's bound to have some repercussions.
That was one promise that President Zero really has kept. He has been working assiduously at transforming the country. I would probably prefer the word wrecking balling the country, but whatever this, it's a fundamental transformation in any case. You referred to the election of the Marxist president in your The Warning, and the vote fraud that went along with it. Now, we know pretty much, I think people in this audience would know about the vote fraud in certain Democrat urban centers, Chicago, Philadelphia. It kind of goes without saying that's what you expect. The day they don't cheat is the day when they were all sick at the same time. The thing that came to my mind about vote fraud was a fairly, I think, rural county, St. Lucie County, Florida, in the district represented at the time by Colonel Allen West. St. Lucie County must have the most patriotic people in the country, because in that county, they have such enthusiastic voter turnout that 141% of the registered voted.
That's incredible, isn't it?
And they don't even get they don't blush.
In the book that preceded the warning, because it's a trilogy, and the one that preceded it that you and I have discussed a few months ago called Second Term, in that book I imagined a fictional voting fraud situation in which this young man happened across the fact that boxes had all been stuffed ahead of time before the vote was counted. And I was in politics in Indiana, and I can tell you a few stories that people actually do that. You don't have to be in the Philippines to have vote fraud.
Right.
And
you can go to Gary County, Indiana, and see all you want.
Yep. Gary.
It may not be Gary County, but it's where Gary is located.
Yeah.
I've been away too long.
Well,
I used to know that.
We always say, Larry, that when we die, we want to be buried in Lake County so we can stay active in politics.
That's right. It's sort of like the little story about the little boy that was sitting bawling on a curb, and a passerby said, "Little boy, what's the matter?" And he said, "Well, my dad rose up from the dead yesterday, and he never even came to say hello. He went to vote."
Well, isn't it amazing on this subject what the Supreme Court did this week?
Just really extraordinary. I have to show identification for all kinds of economic activity that I get involved in because people want to know that I'm who I say I am. But then when I go to vote, hey, come on in, man. No problem whatsoever.
Well, 7 of the justices of the United States Supreme Court decided it was a good idea. So, what do you think is going to happen on?
I think it's time for some nullification. I think it's time for some states to say, well, you made that decision. We think it's unconstitutional. We think it's stupid. And you can send in the 82nd Airborne if you want, but we are going to enforce our law. That's increasingly what states are saying about one subject and another, and that's what we need to hear more of. Talking with John Price about his book, just a little into the future. Had trouble keeping up with breaking events, John reports, because when you try to write about how a Marxist might destroy a country, and we are being governed by a Marxist ruled by a Marxist at the time, that is an occupational hazard of writing a novel like that. I was just thinking, though, there is a solution built into the Constitution, the real meaning of the Second Amendment, and it's it's presented in magnificent fashion in a movie from 1946 called The Battle of Athens. Athens, Tennessee was the scene of a corruptocracy that just completely and shamelessly stole elections. And when veterans returned from World War II and realized what was happening, and that there was an election that year in 1946, that fall, they were electing the city and maybe county officials, I forget. The only part of the movie I've seen is the last 15 minutes or so, which is really cool, and you can find it online. YouTube has it. But as expected, after the election was over, the police and the town officials took the ballot boxes into the police station and locked the door and started to count them, 2 for me and none for him, 2 for me and none for him.
Creative counting, yeah.
Yes, creative counting. It was going on right before their very eyes. So, by golly, the militia showed up. Men chock-a-block full in the beds of pickup trucks, and they just came roaring into town, formed a line around the jail, and told them to come on out with the ballot boxes or they were going to shoot their way in. Well, the corruptocrats fired some rounds out, and when the militia fired into the jail, man, those bullets were bouncing all around. It was clearly not going to turn out well for the corruptocrats. So after about a minute gun battle, they hoisted the white flag, came out. When the boxes were obtained by the people and counted that night, who would have thunk the reform slate had won? But you were describing something where the militia didn't act, and we were talking about Alan West's county of St. Lucie, where the militia did not act. I mean, when you get 141%, the answer is militia, go in there, put those people in jail, take over the voting equipment, and say, we're having the election tomorrow morning starting at whatever time they start the vote, and we're going to do it all over again, only this time we're going to man the machines.
Well, it's embarrassing when Putin in Russia has to lecture the United States on vote fraud and on privacy invasion.
That is the bottom. That is the snake's belly telling you to get underneath.
When the KGB tells us we should have a little more freedom here, that tells you a lot.
The Civilian Defense Force was something that the president promised in his campaign, and actually hasn't said a whole lot about it that I'm aware of since then. But all of a sudden, I read the other day that the Department of Homeland Security has 100,000 armed agents. Folks have been wondering why they've been buying all the ammunition they've been buying.
Oh, yep.
Do you think that might be the answer?
Well, let's go down this path for just a minute. One of the fictional concepts that I discuss in the warning is what people have described frequently as a false flag. And I imagine in this fictional book that the U.S. federal government devises a serious false flag series of events across the country using cars stolen from gun owners and Christians and others, and then packed with explosives and set off in front of federal buildings. And some people might look at that and say, well, that's impossible. You could never have such a fictional event. But as I was doing the research for the book, I came across what was called Northwoods, that was approved under the Kennedy administration by the Joint Chief of Staff, General Lemnitzer. And in that, they were going to paint up a U.S. plane to look like a MiG and shoot down a drone airplane that they pretended had 46 students in it over Cuba so that we could invade Cuba, to have a reason to invade Cuba. And this was approved all the way up at the highest level of the Pentagon. And President Kennedy, to his credit, shot it down. He said he didn't want to do it. But you can imagine that was, 50-some years ago, and still...
And Castro would have known about that. You don't think that might have got him mad at Kennedy, do you? Not to mention the Bay of Pigs invasion, that Kennedy, at the last minute during the invasion, got cold feet and left a whole bunch of patriotic Cubans stranded on the beach. But those two things, I never remember Northwoods until, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. But between that and the Bay of Pigs, we gave Castro plenty of motivation, and we never, we poked the bully in the eye, and then we didn't do anything to follow through. Well, bullies kind of do what bullies do, and I'm reasonably convinced that Castro had his fingers all over the assassination of Kennedy.
Mm-hmm. Well, somebody had to. It didn't just happen.
Well, Lee Harvey Oswald was a big-time communist, and he was more communist than his Russian wife. And so
that's true. That's actually correct. And one of the things that this book talks about is a Tea Party type person who comes in to visit a member of Congress and gives him a memorandum outlining how the communists have taken over the entertainment industry, the educational fields of America, the political, the White House, how they always stay in power once they obtain power, and that they also kill people.
And of course, all that is art. Weapons. That's just art imitating life, because I think most of our listeners know that, well, yeah.
Yeah,
that's already happened.
Well, you have an educated listenership. The average major media listener would recoil before thinking anybody would even use the word communism.
That's right, because unhappily, those people, while they may watch a lot of evening news on one of the networks, they are the low information voter. The networks are designed to keep them at the low information level. God forbid they find out what's really going on, which they can do by reading the warning and going to endofamericabook.com.
The Bill of Rights protects every American's God-given right to keep and bear arms. Now that right is being seriously undermined as legally registered rifles are being confiscated in some parts of our country. If we're not careful, we may find ourselves with no right to own guns, and that's where Gun Owners of America comes in. Gun Owners of America is in Washington every day fighting for you to keep that right. Congressman Ron Paul has called GOA the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. You need to be part of this great grassroots group of activists who are keeping the heat on their members of Congress. Find out right now how you can join. Call 888-886-GUNS and get started receiving their fact-filled newsletters and action alerts. Call 888-886-GUNS or go to their webpage at gunowners.org and help make your voice heard in Washington. Make that call right now and call Gun Owners of America at 888-886-GUNS. Remember, it's not just about gun control, it's about control.
Now, more news about the threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. This is the Gun Owners News Hour. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
Talking with John Price, he's written a novel, The Warning, and that's exactly what it's intended to be, is a warning to all of us that unless we grab hold of the direction our country is moving in right now, we are going to be living in a dictatorship. The mechanisms are being put in place. The country is being fundamentally transformed by Barack the Wrecking Ball Obama, and things are moving fairly quickly with a spineless Republican opposition, at least as far as the Republican leadership. I think I've mentioned this before on this program, but I would like to repeat it again, that there's a new phylum that zoologists have identified. It's a creature that walks upright without a backbone, and they've called it the John Boehner.
Well, you got to feel sorry for this guy because he wanted a position of power. Why, I don't know.
It's a really cool office, John. If you've ever seen where the Speaker of the House hangs out, it is really neat.
Well, Mike Pence from Indiana left the House because he saw what was happening coming up the road with Boehner, and I think that was probably a good decision.
Well, and he's been one of the most principled men to have served in the Congress. God bless him. He's really, I think, one of those that's the real deal.
Oh, Mike Pence, no, there's no question about it.
Now the governor of Indiana.
Yes, he is the governor of Indiana.
Good deal,
We attended the same Bible study together. He's a great guy. One of the things that I wanted to kind of slip in this conversation was I saw an interview, a transcript of an interview with the First Lady recently in which she made kind of her own prediction. And the prediction was that once the Supreme Court says that same-sex marriage is in the Constitution and that churches have to marry anybody who wants to be married, that they better get ready to obey the law or lose their rights to have religious freedom.
Certainly tax-deductible religious freedom.
Correct. And who knows? There's one chapter in the book where I go a little further than that,
right,
where the pastor refuses to abide by the request from the government, and they come in and remove him. They physically send him on to heaven.
Right.
So who knows exactly where all these things are headed, but it is clear that people who are communists, Marxists, have no time of day at all for people who profess any faith, either Catholic, Jewish, Christian, because it's contrary to their own beliefs, which is that the God that they worship is the state.
And their own power, their own control of the state.
Right.
And so any opposition to them becomes treason, and that's why they are so humorless, because when we argue with them, it drives them nuts. There was a case that Gun Owners Foundation is getting involved in where a young man wore a T-shirt to school that had the NRA on it, just the 3 letters, and then it had a hunting rifle, clearly a hunting rifle.
Yes, I just read about that, yeah.
Yeah, and the police officer initially accused him of making terrorist threats. Well, from what I can tell of this young man, I doubt anything like that happened at all. It's just that in a town of under 2,000 people, there were 5 people in authority, a principal, a teacher, a police officer, a judge, and a prosecutor, who all have their brains fried. The idea of a T-shirt, which is kind of a First Amendment item, and he wasn't depicting a Muslim beheading somebody while shouting Allahu Akbar. He was just saying protect the right. I think that's called a political statement, and that's protected speech. Unless, of course, it offends somebody, and we know that the First Amendment doesn't allow you to offend anybody. At least a conservative under the First Amendment is not allowed to offend a liberal.
No, that's hate speech if you do that. Well, you will win that case because that's over the edge.
I think it is so over the edge, and I can't imagine how they stayed stuck on it. It's as if they grabbed a hold of the tar baby and they couldn't figure out how to get unstuck.
Well, look at the IRS. How long did they stay stuck on the fact that Cincinnati had approved the discrimination against Tea Party people?
Yeah, just like Benghazi was motivated by a video.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're not very creative about their lies, and that is one of the things that's going to be sinking them, Lord willing. And so, then you sort of deal with a nullification issue in terms of a guy running for governor in Texas, and he brings up the S word. It's arguably Texas.
Secede from the Union, and his campaign takes off like a rocket, and he becomes very popular as a candidate, and then all of a sudden his attorney visits him. He's just been contacted by a very good friend who works at the highest levels of law enforcement in Washington, and he says to him, if you go ahead with this campaign, you and your wife will no longer be alive. And, of course, the candidate blows his top and says, how could this be, et cetera. And he says, well, it's up to you. And so finally they decide they're going to leave the country, and when they get to the airport, they're on the no-fly list and they can't leave. Now, some people might say, well, that could never happen, but Adolf Hitler in 1936 put out a decree that Jews could not leave Germany. And eventually those who did leave were limited to only 30 marks. That was before his ruling that they couldn't leave at all. So it's not an impossible situation in a totalitarian country, which is what America's swiftly headed toward, to imagine that exiting the country, leaving Dodge, as you said at the beginning of the program, may not be possible. And for people who like to read these kind of books, they can get it on Kindle for only $2.99, less than the cost of a Burger King. And also it's on Amazon and softback. But what I tried to do in the book was just capture things that are possible, fictional things, and the reader will have to decide if they think that these could ever possibly happen. But that's the whole purpose of fiction, is to get our attention based on our world around it.
It really helps to take that little step back into that semi-fictional world of your novel, and that really does kind of look like what's going on here. I wonder what I would do if it really got to that point. Now, your protagonist had a rather creative solution. He and his wife booked a cruise in the Caribbean, and, man, they got some kind of powerful lost when they hit one of the ports.
Well, they jumped ship, as they say.
Oh, they didn't jump back on, as the case might be.
Right. Correct. The funny thing, Larry, is after I wrote that chapter, I was with some people last week, and they were telling me about people they knew who had left their cruise boats in Belize to move to Belize. Now, I don't know why they chose that mode of transportation, but
yeah, you can't take a whole lot of your personal effects that way.
No,
it's a bit of a limited.
500,000 German Jewish people left Germany with a suitcase.
They were really smart. They understood the times. Because I have thought, what would I do if I thought it had come to that point? That means I'd have to, in the case of your protagonist, book passage on a Caribbean cruise ship, get on there with maybe 3-4 suitcases, as many as you could plausibly take, maybe pay the extra baggage fee, of course, and set off knowing that you're not even going to use the rest of your ticket when you get to somewhere, and you're going to miss all those meals, and all of your stuff, all of your cars, all of everything is going to be back. And maybe you gave the key to somebody at church, but it's for them to dispose of, not for you to go and return to.
Well, here's another warning tied into what you just said. You can't get on the cruise boat, and you can't leave the country without a passport. That was implemented several years ago.
Yep.
So for people who are thinking, well, maybe that'll be the way I'll do it, make sure you get a passport.
When I first started visiting my wife's country, I didn't even have to have a passport. It was enough to show my driver's license. Obviously, I spoke like a gringo, even though I speak Spanish quite fluently. But, you could look at my face and think, that guy's a gringo. And so we didn't need a passport at all.
No, things have changed.
Things have changed. You used to be able to leave the country without any ID at all.
Well, that's true, and now you can't leave with more than $10,000. And
right.
By the way, that's not per person. A lot of people think that the law, which says that, applies, but it doesn't. The Treasury implemented a regulation that says $10,000 per ticket.
So you'd have to be willing to cut grass, work in the Burger Chef or whatever, someplace in Tegucigalpa. Try that on for size, folks. Do you really want your freedom that bad? John Price, author of The Warning, is our guest today. We'll be back shortly.
Now, more news about the threats to your liberties and your right to keep and bear arms. This is the Gun Owners News Hour. And here once again is your host, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt.
John Price and I are talking about his novel, The Warning. And as I've said already, it's not really that much of a novel. He just changed the names of the guilty and the innocent to protect them alike. One of the issues that you raise that I think we ought to look at is an issue that was debated heavily in our pulpits in the 18th century in the run-up to the War for Independence, and that is, what is Romans 13 talking about? Does it say that when all souls have to obey the higher authority, that whatever our communist president says we have to do, or does it mean that even he is a soul, and therefore he has to obey a higher authority? Such as what? Well, how about the Constitution that he took an oath to uphold? And I think his oath was under God. So therefore he's placed himself under the highest authority. And for him to rebel against that makes him a rebel. We're being ruled by a rebel, just like our forefathers were by rebel King George III.
You bring up a really important question, because the Department of Homeland Security has been training pastors around the country. And if you Google this, you can find it. And they go in and they teach them that
That's really Orwellian, John, my friend.
It's very Orwellian, extremely Orwellian. Because they tell them that you should teach your congregation that Romans 13 means you should obey the government. Whatever the government tells you to do, you should do it. And, of course,
when I read that in The Warning, I thought, well, that hasn't happened yet. You're telling me that's all. Your novel keeps getting overtaken by events.
Well, that's actually authentic. If you Google Department of Homeland Security religious clergy training courses, you can find it, because they're going in and teaching them that's what Romans 13 says. I don't think that's what Romans 13 means, but that's what they're teaching that it says. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who had to deal with all these things under Hitler, dealt with the same issue,
right,
and ultimately concluded that we have to obey God rather than men.
Right.
And that the misapplication of Romans 13 is not to say, well, as long as the government says you should do it, well, you just go ahead and do it. But because what if government tells you that you should murder someone? Is that okay then?
The early church had to deal with this. In the Roman Empire, the Emperor Augustus was viewed as at least semi-divine, and that you actually could find no other salvation than through the Emperor Augustus. And that's why they actually had coins. There is no other name under heaven by which you can be saved. And so when we read in the New Testament, I think it's in the book of Acts, that there's no other name under heaven by which you can be saved than that of Jesus Christ, that is a flat-out attack, just straight on, against the Emperor Augustus. The New Testament is a political document. It is a document of the declaration of the freedom of man under God against tyrants.
All right. Well, even Jesus said, if you don't have a sword, go get one.
Exactly. And the sword he was talking about would be the equivalent of an AR-15 or an M16 today.
Right. Well, you have the right to protect yourself. Self-defense is the preeminent right. But when you take away the preeminent right, which is really what they intend to do, then you can't defend yourself anymore, and you might as well forget all the other rights because they all flow from the right to defend your own self.
It's something we need to be thinking about, folks, because the tyrants are pushing hard. They keep exploring how far can they push us. Now, by the grace of God, we've seen sheriffs rising up now over 400 that they're not going to play, that the feds are. It ranges from they're not going to cooperate with a federal, say, gun bust, which is actually significant. I didn't realize it until I was in a county where that had been stated. And they had done some research, and they found that even our gargantuan federal government can't pull off a big bust like the ATF going and grabbing some poor guy's guns unless they have the extensive cooperation of the local sheriff and or police department. And if the sheriff has said, I ain't playing, you're not going to get my men to help you, even if he's not threatening to arrest them, that means that they don't have enough men. Our army is so extended around the world, being the world policeman, and Janet Napolitano only has 100,000 armed agents all over the country at this point. They just don't have the resources to deal with a sheriff and a county commission that says, go take a jump.
Colorado has considered legislation to prohibit the sheriffs from doing what you just said.
And that's where we're going to come, I think, to the crossroads. What are we the people going to do? Sheriffs are funded either by county governments or states. And if their economic chain is pulled, would we the people be willing to voluntarily tax ourselves for a sheriff's fund so the sheriff could continue to operate the jail, arrest errant state and national officials, et cetera, et cetera? I think it could come down to that. And we better be thinking about alternate means of finances because it's all about money at the end of the day.
That's true. Follow the money. If you can cut off the sheriff's authority by cutting off his funding, by passing legislation, then you got a problem. The sheriff could be the last line of defense in much of what we're talking about.
I liked your analysis of the Alamo, that, they ultimately were defeated. Every last one of them murdered by the Mexican army. But they expected that might happen, and they had a strategic goal in mind, which was to delay the Mexican army sufficiently to allow the Texans time to muster and take care of business, which is what happened. So even though they were all wiped out and murdered by a murdering army, they ultimately, their side won. And the question, I guess, that some of us may have to face someday, are we willing to do what the men of the Alamo did? I think you mentioned in the book, somewhere I had read recently, that one of the guys was just newly married.
Right.
Life was just beginning.
It was, and the reason that I decided to do a fictional look at what would happen if 180-some people took over the Alamo and made a statement was exactly to show that there would still be men of courage who would be willing even to lay down their lives if necessary in order to halt the onslaught.
A lot of interesting and life and death decisions are going to be being made in the next few years. Things will be better if some conservatives are elected to Congress, if people like Ted Cruz get a few people to ride alongside of them. We'll probably be a lot better off. Senator Cruz is somebody that is demonstrating incredible leadership and shows that one man can make a difference. That means we
to John McCain.
John McAlister is my preferred reference to McCain. The man who couldn't get elected president against a zero, and he's lecturing us on what we need to do to win. You just got to love these rhinos. Well, John Price, we've hardly scratched the surface of your book, The Novel of America in the Last Days, The Warning. But, folks, I would urge you to go to endofamericabook.com and get a copy. Think about the way our country looks if you just take this little step outside. And I hope you can keep your powder dry wherever you are, John.
Our rights to keep and bear arms has never been under as much attack. And gun owners of America are fighting daily in Washington to protect that right. This program, the Gun Owners News Hour, keeps you up to date on that fight. GOA is the only no-compromise gun lobby in Washington. Remember, the issue is not just about gun control. It's about control.